Oi girls and boys and everything in between, it's Sos Chaining and back with a video about genning. Oh boy, this is going to be fun. Today we're going to be talking about genning in Pokemon. We're going to talk about what it is, we're going to talk about the arguments for and against it, and I'm also going to give you my solution to genning and how to completely solve the problem, abolish the arguments, and basically the way Game Freak should go with their games moving forward, especially with Generation 8 coming on the Nintendo Switch in the next year or 2 years. Firstly, I'm going to go ahead and explain how you breed a Pokemon the normal way, how you gen a Pokemon, then I'll talk about the arguments for genning and against genning, and then I'll give you my solution as to what's going to solve everything in my opinion. Obviously, you can let me know in the comments once you've watched the entire video and listened to everything about whether you're for genning, against genning, what you think of my solution, what you think would be a better solution, but let's jump straight into it. When you go to breed a competitive Pokemon from scratch, there are certain key elements that you need to be aware of. First up, we have IVs, which are individual values, which determine the power of a certain Pokemon's stats on top of their natural base stats for that species. Now these stats are determined pretty much at random when a Pokemon is produced, but they can be passed down, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. Next up we have EVs, which are effort values, which are basically extra points added onto a Pokemon's stats as it's trained up. Again, we'll get to it in just a moment. Next up we have the nature of a particular Pokemon, which a lot of natures don't do anything, but some of them will increase one of the Pokemon's stats by 10% whilst reducing another by 10%. So for example, if a Pokemon has an adamant nature, its attack is increased by 10%, whilst its special attack is decreased by 10%. Obviously, an adamant nature is useful to a Pokemon that specializes in physical attacks, where its special attack isn't necessary, so it can afford to be reduced. And finally, we have egg moves, which are moves that a Pokemon naturally cannot learn through just leveling up or through TMs or things like that, and therefore, this Pokemon has to be bred with another Pokemon that knows that move to pass it into that original Pokemon's family. Now, for example, Stuffle is a Pokemon that can't learn the move Mega Kick. However, if you breed Stuffle with a Mudbray or a Mudsdale that knows Mega Kick, the Stuffle that is then born will know Mega Kick from level 1. Now, breeding Pokemon can be very, very tiresome and very, very long-winded. I'm going to try and summarize it as simply as I can. If you have a female Pokemon of the species that you're looking to breed into a competitive Pokemon, you can breed that Pokemon with any other Pokemon in that Pokemon's egg group, which you can find out online, to produce an egg of the Pokemon species you're looking to make into your competitive Pokemon. I'm going to say the word Pokemon a lot throughout this video, so follow along. What you're looking for here is for the Pokemon that comes out of your egg to be a Pokemon with the best IVs possible. EVs aren't important at this point because they relate to being trained up, but when a Pokemon is level 1, it needs to have the best IVs to be able to be your competitive Pokemon. The best way to guarantee this is to go out and SOS chain a Pokemon that's in your egg group. So for example, if your Pokemon's in the field egg group, you could go out, find another Pokemon that's in the field egg group, and SOS chain until you get to a chain of 30. Once you get to an SOS chain of 30, every Pokemon that responds to the call for help will be guaranteed to have 4 max IVs. Once you've then got 2 Pokemon, a male and a female, each with 4 max IVs in certain stats, hopefully encompassing all 6 of the possible stats that you can cover, give one of them a Destiny Knot to hold, and then that gives them the chance, when they're in the daycare, of passing down 5 of those max IVs to the child Pokemon. So as we said, your end goal is to produce a Pokemon that has 5 or 6 max IVs, because that is your competitive Pokemon. If you want them to know a specific egg move, you need to make sure that egg move gets bred onto this family at the very beginning, because you're gonna want to keep that egg move there for the final Pokemon. The same goes for natures. You need to sort your natures out early so that when you're producing these Pokemon, if one of them has the nature that you want your Pokemon to have, so for example an adamant nature, you need to give that adamant Pokemon an Everstone and put it in the daycare with the Pokemon that has the Destiny Knot. Then you are guaranteed to pass down an adamant nature to all the offspring. So then all you have to do, once you've got the nature and the egg move sorted, is just solely focus on what the IVs are. It's complicated, it takes a long while, but ultimately you will end up, after probably a couple of hours, maybe depending on your luck, you might end up taking about 4 or 5 hours to do it, you will produce a Pokemon egg that hatches into a Pokemon with the egg moves you want, the nature you want, and the IVs that you want for that Pokemon. Your next next step is to train the Pokemon up, and that's where your EVs come into play. You can buy vitamins at the Pokemon Center for 10,000 Pokédollars, and basically they will add 10 EVs to a specific stat, up to a maximum of 100 EVs. Now this is a problem because each individual stat has the potential to have 252 EVs assigned to it. You can't do it to all stats on the same Pokemon because you can only do a maximum EV total of 510, which is where the idea of EV spreads comes in, which is just a blanket term for basically, oh, I've put this many EVs in attack, this many EVs in speed, and then this many EVs in HP, stuff like that. The way to spread out the 510 effort value points between the stats of your Pokemon. There are certain effective ways to do it to make certain Pokemon better than others. Another way of increasing your Pokemon's EVs is using wing items, like the Genius Wing for example. Each of those items will add 1 EV to a specific stat, but this time there isn't a 100 EV cap. You can do it all the way up to 252 for a certain stat, but of course you need 252 of that item, which can be very time consuming to obtain. By far the easiest way of increasing your EVs is through actually training your Pokemon doing Pokemon battles. Now every Pokemon has what's called an EV yield, which is how many EVs and in what stats those EVs come from each time you defeat one of those Pokemon. So for example, you can get 1 attack EV every time you defeat a Pikipek. So if you specifically want to train a Pokemon in attack, what you want to do is defeat a whole load of Pikipeks. And of course the most effective way to do it is take advantage of Sos Chaining. Now the good thing with Sos Chaining is every time a Pokemon calls for help, the Pokemon that responds to the help call will give double the amount of EVs you'd normally get. So in our example, every Pikipek that replies to the call for help will give 2 attack EVs. To increase even further the amount of EVs gained from defeating one of these Pokemon, you can add a power item. So in our example, if we gave the Power Bracer to our Pokemon to hold, it would give 8 extra EVs on top of every Pokemon defeated. So in our Pikipek example, for every Pikipek we defeat anyway, we'd get 1 EV, plus 8 EVs from the Power Bracer, and then of course because it's an SOS chained Pikipek, that would be double. So we get 9 plus 9, which is 18 EVs per Pikipek defeated, which means to max out our attack stat at 252, we need to defeat 14 Pikipek, which is a lot quicker and a lot easier to do. And then of course on top of that, if your Pokemon has the Pokérust virus, that doubles it again, which means that you'd only need to defeat 7 Pikipek to max out a stat. So power items are really, really important. But that is basically the rigmarole you have to go through to get a Pokemon that is battle ready, that is competitive. This can take you, let's say you didn't have the power items for example as well, this can take you hours if not days to accomplish for a single Pokemon. Now remember, you're going to need a team of 6 if you want any chance of competing. So as you can imagine, breeding is long-winded, it's time-consuming, it's frustrating, but some people have found a solution to that, a way around the breeding, and that is genning. Now for those who don't know, but I'm sure you guys watching the video all know, genning is short for generating, because that's what you're doing, you are generating a Pokemon. Basically the way genning works is you use third-party software to copy your save file, which you can then put onto your computer so that you can manipulate it from the comfort of your PC. You can then manipulate the stats, abilities and movesets and everything about your Pokemon in order to make it battle ready, which of course cuts out all the breeding from hours and hours and hours down to genning a Pokemon in a matter of minutes. Now when it comes to genning, there are a lot of people that are fine with it and there are a lot of people that are against it, and there are valid points on both sides, and that's what I want to quickly cover here. On the genning side of things, there is the argument that whether you breed a Pokemon in-game or whether you produce it using a computer, if its stats and abilities and movesets are all within the legal limits that that Pokemon can actually achieve in-game, you can produce a Pokemon. The best you can do is produce a Pokemon that is 100% obtainable in the game. So let's take Garchomp for example. If you generate a Garchomp that has moves that Garchomp can learn, stats that Garchomp can have, and abilities that Garchomp can have, that is identical to a Garchomp that was bred to the same specification in-game. Let's take it one step further. If you bred a Garchomp in-game that has perfect stats, the right abilities that you want and the right moveset that is all within its legal limits, and you then put it into your computer and make a copy of it, you've basically got a bred Pokemon and a genned Pokemon that are completely identical. If you gave those two Pokemon to a trainer, now with those two Pokemon that are identical, it doesn't matter which one's bred and which one's genned because it's down to the skill of the trainer using them. The reason I agree with this is because Pokemon is much like a game of chess. If you're playing chess and your chess pieces are crafted from the finest oak, varnished in the most incredible beeswax from a tropical climate, they're the absolute best chess pieces money can buy. They're still the same in terms of what moves they can use to your opponent who's just got a basic set of chess pieces. The skill comes from the person using the chess pieces to win the game of chess, and it's exactly the same in Pokemon. If you had a team of Pokemon that was 100% bred from scratch, took like hours, days to produce, against a team of identical Pokemon that were generated to have the exact same stats as those Pokemon, there is no telling who would win because it would be down to the skill of the trainer. You could not make a logical argument that would be, this trainer with the genned Pokemon has an advantage because his Pokemon are genned, because he doesn't. If he doesn't have the skill to defeat his opponent who's bred their Pokemon, the bred Pokemon are going to walk all over him. It's much like if I looked at the stats, abilities and moves of one of the world champion Pokemon teams, and I generated those Pokemon and I gave them to my girlfriend who doesn't really know much about type matchups, doesn't really know much about Pokemon battling. You cannot tell me that my girlfriend would have an advantage over anybody she battles because her Pokemon are genned, because she doesn't know how to use them. She doesn't know how to predict what opponent's strategies are going to be, or even what strategies are good for the Pokemon she's using. I don't really see an effective argument that tells me that you have an advantage over an opponent purely based on the fact that your Pokemon are genned, except for one, and that argument is the time factor, because obviously if you can create a team of Pokemon in minutes by genning, you have an advantage in a way over somebody who has taken days and weeks to produce their team, because you can practice with that team more often. You can practice for months while they're creating their team, and of course if one of your teammates doesn't work out and you're realizing one of these Pokemon isn't quite working the way you want it to, instead of having to breed another Pokemon for a few days or a week, you can just create one in a matter of minutes, slot it into the team, and then practice and practice and practice. Now, in a way, this would give you an advantage, but at the same time, you can't really say that without knowing the person's background. Imagine if you're studying to become a doctor. You probably work 8 to 10 hours a day, and then you also have studying to do, or vice versa during the evening. You probably don't have time to sit practicing with your Pokemon for as much time as someone else is spending producing their Pokemon. So when you two both get to some kind of potential battle situation, you probably have both practiced with your team the same amount of time. I mean, obviously everyone's case is different for every situation, so it's not really for me to say whether one person has an advantage or not, because I don't know their lives. Of course, when it comes to a championship situation where actual money is being won, then yeah, I would argue you probably should breed your Pokemon, but the chances are a lot of people probably don't, because of course part of the checks that the Pokemon Company do to ensure that Pokemon are legal for battle will turn away a Pokemon whose stats, abilities and movesets are not legal for battle, whether they're genned or not. So it's kind of like, well, even though your Pokemon are genned and have got through the system, doesn't mean you're gonna win, because you might still be a bad battler in comparison to other people in the competition. But I don't know, maybe there's a moral argument there that you shouldn't bring gen Pokemon, but that's where my solution will come in a little bit. But I do want to point out from just a personal level, and for transparency, I do gen a lot of Pokemon for my battle teams that I use in my Wi-Fi battles. Now, the only time I ever battle people is during my Thursday Wi-Fi battle streams, because I don't have time to battle anyone any other time, and I've not got the skill, I recognise I don't have the skill, to go to World Championships and things like that. So I'm really not the kind of person that's going to be competing in World Championships for money, or competing in local competitions, because I don't have that competitive Pokemon player flair that a lot of competitive players have. The reason that I gen Pokemon is because people get bored. People get bored of seeing the same team over and over again, and I just don't have time to keep breeding Pokemon for 8-9 hours a day, 5 days a week, because I got work to do. I got bills to pay, I got dogs to feed, I live on my own. I have financial things that I need to do, and I can't spend that time where I should be working breeding Pokemon. So what I do is I gen Pokemon teams so that those teams are ready to use to keep my audience entertained. I always ensure that these Pokemon have legal stats, legal movesets, and legal abilities, because then it's still being fair to my opponents, because then the only advantage that either myself or my opponent has is our skill as a battler. This situation as well does numb the argument of, well, you've had more time to battle with these Pokemon, and your opponent hasn't. That's not the case. In fact, most of the time, I'm battling people that are using their regular battle teams that they use quite often, whereas I'm using a team that I might have generated half an hour before I went live. So in that scenario, even though I've genned my Pokemon, I'm the trainer at the disadvantage because my first battle of that live stream is the first time I'm using a particular team. And this fact that genning doesn't give me an advantage over any other trainer is evident in my win-loss ratio. Like, yeah, I've won quite a few battles, but in the same vein, last year I lost like 258 battles out of about 600-700, and that's not because the opponent was using gen Pokemon instead of me. That was because I wasn't as good a battler as the people facing me, and that's people who have actually bred their teams defeating a team of gen Pokemon. So in my opinion, based on my experience, genning a Pokemon does not give you an advantage. If you gen Pokemon, you're still not as good as people that breed their Pokemon or other players who gen. You're only as good as your skill in battle, and it does not matter where your Pokemon came from. If they have legal stats, legal moves, and legal abilities, you don't have any advantage over any other player except for your own personal skill level in battle. But of course, I've waffled on for ages. You come here because you want my solution to the problem of genning, and I believe it's really simple, and I think it's something that Game Freak should implement and would be easily implementable on a platform like the Nintendo Switch. And that is, once you come to your Pokemon title screen, much like games like Call of Duty that have a competitive scene or some kind of esports element to them, you have a single player campaign, which is your story that you play through, where you can shiny hunt, where you can breed Pokemon, where you can do your whole Pokemon adventure, but also a multiplayer option. And when you click multiplayer, it takes you to an online place where you can create any Pokemon that has any of its legal moves. You can decide its stats and abilities, you can decide everything about the Pokemon, much in the way that Smogon's Team Builder works. You could build a team of 6 Pokemon, or multiple teams of 6 Pokemon, from any stats, any abilities, any movesets, to create perfect Pokemon. So effectively, it would be like genning Pokemon, but instead, everyone would be able to do it. And that would be the way that you create teams, and that would be the way that no one has any advantage or disadvantage, because it's all down to you choosing the right Pokemon, selecting the right stats and abilities, experimenting, seeing what works best, and then ultimately you would challenge each other in championship environments using the multiplayer option. So there would be no reason to generate Pokemon, there would be no reason to breed Pokemon apart from for like Masuda method, or if you wanted to make your in-game Pokemon stronger. But when it comes to online, you'd have this team builder, which would be the best way, because there's over 820 Pokemon now and counting. So having a team builder where you can build teams from any combination of Pokemon, build them up with whatever IVs you want, build them up with whatever EVs you want, build them up with the moves and egg moves and things like that, that would be a way of stopping genning, because it would be incorporating the generation of Pokemon, like the generation factor of Pokemon, where you can actually determine what the Pokemon stats and abilities are. Yes, I understand that some of you would be like, well, what's the point of breeding then? But again, you could breed the perfect Pokemon so that you can use that in your in-game teams and things like that. Maybe there'll be tougher bosses in like the battle tree and things, so if you wanted to compete in the battle tree, you'd have to breed Pokemon for that. But when it comes to multiplayer, if we're all doing the same thing, no one's got an advantage over anyone else. No one sees themselves as having an advantage over anyone else because everyone's doing the same thing. If Pokemon goes, we don't want people to generate Pokemon with third-party software and put it into their game, just create a separate section of a Pokemon game that is the multiplayer option, and when you go into the multiplayer option, you come into a lobby where you can create your teams, and then you can go off and battle people on BattleSpot. And I think that will be the future of Pokemon, and I think that's what needs to be incorporated onto the Switch. I mean, Smogon approved it. It's easily programmable. I mean, not easily, but it's something that is programmable. If someone who's not affiliated with Game Freak can produce that, then imagine what Game Freak can do. Imagine how good they can make it look. Instead of it just being a Pokemon GIF on a page, you could go into a Pokemon's window to select its moves and stuff. Much like in a racing game where you've got the car spinning in the showroom, you'd have like a Heliolisk just spinning on a pedestal while you're editing its moves and its stats and things. And I think that's a really great idea for the future of Pokemon, especially in a competitive way, because then you can't argue, oh, well, this guy's going to have more of a competitive advantage because he's only going to be able to use the limitations of that Pokemon's stats, abilities and moves, he's not able to illegally gen anything. Everything has to be produced in game. Now, is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? You guys tell me in the comments. I really don't mind if you disagree with me. Also, if you have any other ideas that would be better for solving this problem, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear them. I'm going to be reading to find out what you guys think of all this, and hopefully we can just bring the Pokemon community back together, because it shouldn't be I don't like you because you gen, I don't like you because you don't gen. It should be like, hey, you like Pokemon, and I like Pokemon, so we have something in common. Oh, you gen your Pokemon? Okay, I just won't battle you then. What's the big deal? We shouldn't be hating on each other for having different ways of playing a game. Yes, one way is not the way the game is intended to be played, but it really shouldn't matter. If you're fans of Pokemon and you like certain Pokemon, you should be able to be friends with anyone in the Pokemon community. If they gen and you don't, just don't battle them. But you can still talk about your favourite Pokemon, you can still talk about your favourite events in the game, you can still go to events together and talk to each other and hang out. Being someone who gens or being someone that doesn't gen should never exclude you from any part of the Pokemon community, because we're all Pokemon fans, and that's what matters. That's what should be important. And if you guys really don't like people based on one thing about like whether they gen or not, that's a you problem, and that's something you need to look into, because I don't care if you gen or not. Like, there are people that gen everything and don't breed anything, and I don't have a problem with that. And there are people who are adamantly against genning and who won't battle me because they know I'm going to use some gen Pokemon. And you know what I do? I go, okay, that's cool. I hope you enjoy the stream anyway. I hope you still see the battles that are happening and still enjoy them, because that's what matters. It's about enjoying Pokemon. And if you enjoy Pokemon, don't let one aspect of it ruin your experience. Just enjoy yourself. Now, I know this video has been a little bit long and I apologise for the length of it, but if you enjoyed it, hit the like button. If you didn't enjoy it, go ahead and hit the dislike button. I'd really appreciate it. Of course, if you want to see more videos from me, hit subscribe. And until next time, I'm Sos Chaining. Keep on training.